Well, we've gotten a few more old photographs of Thornley being donated by quite a few people, which we're very grateful for. And now we're going to do another DVD of them, Thornley through the pit years. Now we're going to start this DVD with Park Street. This is where the prefabs used to be, running down by the library. And this is the rear of Park Street, looking down from Gowland's fish shop. But today it's the Chinese restaurant, the Chinese shop. Now this is Park Street, backs again, but looking up the street. Now when you look up the street, you can see right at the top, you can just see Gowland's fish shop. As I said, today it's a Chinese takeaway. But this is the back of Park Street, looking up. Now here's another shot of Park Street, the front's looking up. Look at the state of those gardens. I don't know what they've got the fences made with, but as I say, they used to keep pigs in the front gardens, they used to keep hens, all sorts of goats. And when you look at the state of these houses, these quarry houses, I mean, these would be built in the 1800s, and they came under the slum clearance of 1936-37. You can see why these was all pulled down and people was rehoused in the new council houses. So as I say, this is what they had to live in the early days. Now this photograph would be round about the early 1970s. You see Vine Street and Chapel Street, Ginger Dawson's, all those streets was pulled down. And if you see on the left hand side there, that's Wilson's Butchers. And just to the right, you can see the spire of Bow Street Chapel. Now Bow Street Chapel, I think it came down around about 75, 76. And that very light building just in front of it, that's still up, that's the Three Horseshoes. And at the front, that is Fleming's shop. And you can still see between Fleming's shop and Rita Chip Chasers, you can still see Thornley store. That was still up at the time and all, but this was the early 1970s. Now here's a wonderful photograph. This is William and Annie Brayton, and they're celebrating the 50th wedding anniversary. Look at all the cards they're getting there, and the bouquets of flowers, the cake on the stand there, very nice and beautiful. And as I said, this is their 50th wedding anniversary. Now, I was given this photograph quite a while ago, and it's the rear of Dyke Street, right at the top. And you can see in the background that's High Street running up. But all was on it was Auntie Bessie. Now, I don't know a second name, but if anyone knows her, they could give us her name and we could put it on with the photograph what we've got at the Heritage Centre. As I say, this would have been taken roughly in the 1930s. Now here we've got Sab Baldessara's shop, which was at the bottom of Dunelm Road. That's Sab standing in the doorway and Tony Hunt standing next to him. I say Tony shifted to Peterlee, but I've been told since he passed away a year or two ago. As I say, this photograph's been saved, top Baldessara's, and this would have been taken in the late 50s, early 60s. Looking at this photograph, the lady on the right looks as though she's a standard bearer, so this could have been something to do with the British Legion. Nurse Brewster's on this photograph, and I think it's taken in Thornley Church. That would have been 1950s, I think, or even in the early 60s. Now, this photograph came into Heritage Centre, and the people who brought it in said it was Chapel Square in Thornley. Well, I've never known a Chapel Square in Thornley. We've had School Square, Chapel Street, but these houses, they've got me beat. I've wrapped my brain on all of them, and they just don't come up as a street in Thornley. Maybe someone looking at them might say, right, that street was there but pulled down early, but I would love to know which street it is, and if anyone knows or has information, please let us know, because as I say, it's another old street that's been saved. Now, St Bartholomew's Church, Thornley, the confirmation class. Now, we can pan round with this one, but I only know one person on here, with me being a Wheatley Hill lad. The only lad I know is right in the front row, right in the middle there. That's Barry Jackson from Thornley. And as I said, this would have been taken in the 1950s. Sergeant Matthew Cox. Sergeant Cox was in Thornley in the late 1800s and early 1900s. I don't know a great lot about him, but he said he was a rather a good policeman in them days, which he had to be. As I say, this would have been taken late 1800s. Now here we've got Thornley Methodist Circuit with the youth Stepford banner. Now David Iveson brought this in for us. Now, David is on the second row back from the front, the fourth one in. Unfortunately, I don't know anybody else on here, but I think we'll pan round, and it's 1971 when this was taken, so a lot of people on here will still recognise themselves. Now, this photograph could be 1950s or even the 1960s. It's Mrs. Fairclough from Thornley, who she was a member of the Thornley Drama Group. Now, this is at Buckingham Palace. She's received an award from the Queen. We don't know what it is, whether it's the BAM or the MBA or whatever it is, but she must have done a lot for drama for to be given this award at Buckingham Palace. Now this is a photograph down Thornley, in between the two God Streets. The street in the background, that's Garden Terrace, and it's Billy Headley's butcher's van from Wheatley Hill, and one of his drivers selling meat to people in Thornley. In those days, different villages, the butcher vans went round other people's villages. As I said, this was Mr. Headley's van in the 1930s, delivering meat to people in Thornley. John Street, Thornley, but very few photographs on John Street. But this is one where I got of Gloria Garnham. Now that's Gloria sitting on the front of the motorbike. Everybody will know today is Gloria Dower. She married Billy Dower and she works in the Thornley betting shop. And as I say, she gave me this photograph, and this is when they lived down in John Street in the 1950s. Gohall Farm. Now this is an early photograph. When you look at Gohall today and you see the size of the trees at the front of Gohall, these 60, 70, 80 footers. But look at the trees on there, they're only about 5 or 6 foot high, they're just little spruces. There's no houses there, no council houses in front of it. The Rosebery Crescent wasn't built till 1936, so it'll let you see how old this photograph was. Early 1900s. Bow Street West, Thornley. There's another photographs of the slum clearance. These two houses at the top, when these people shifted out to go into the council houses, Tommy Baldessara took this over. He had it as a workshop, and then next to it, they say the little cottage. The little cottage was pulled down a few years later, and then the big house next to it was a presbytery from 1860s up till 1900, where all the Catholic fathers lived. As I say today, it's made into two houses. St Job's has got the top one, and I've got the second one. But as I say, this was taken in 1936-37. Now straight over the road, Bow Street East. You can see the top three houses there, and just round to the right, the top there was the forge behind the Three Horseshoes pub, and then you'll see the bottom of the third house there. That's Bow Street Chapel. It's all white bricks, lovely building, the spire and everything. I say the houses was pulled down in the 1930s, but the chapel didn't go till the mid-70s. It's a lovely photograph. Now we've got the halfway house. This would have been taken round about the 1960s. It's in a bit of a dilapidated state there, but it was shortly after then when it was sold and they made it into Crossways Hotel. And as I say, it's gone now, but this would have been around about the 1960s, the halfway house. Headley's Bakers. Well, this was at the top of the street, just up from School Square from the police station on the right hand side. And down the other side was Cooper's Terrace. But underneath the shop, they had a cellar where they used to do all the bacon, all the bread and everything. And then on the top was the shop where they used to sell it. This ended up in the 1950s, 60s. It was a fish shop. It was Hutchison's fish shop. Beautiful fish and chips them days. As I said, this was Headley's when he had the horse and cart, and this would have been round about the 1920s to early 30s. Now we're leaving the 1920s, 30s, and we go into 1930s, 40s, and here's Mr. Headley again at Thornley. Looks as though they must have made quite a bit of money, because he's bought himself a van now to go around delivering the bread instead of with a horse and cart. And looking at that, he must have been proud of it, because look at the shine on that motor. He must have been proud of it. As I said, this would be around about the 1930s, 40s. Now this is part of the Hodgson family at Thornley. Freddie Hodgson gave me this photograph. As I say, these are a few of the brothers and sisters taken in the early 1900s. (1960s) St. Bartholomew's Church. This was the church fair. And these two ladies here is Molly Hutchinson and Mrs. Robinson. It looks as though they've been selling something on a stall for the church. We've got Kenny Johnson here. Kenny with his girlfriend, Pat Richardson. And Pat was from Shotton. See, her and Kenny got married. And this looks a cosy little photograph in front of the fire. I know this would be taken in the 1960s. This photograph is another one that came under the slum clearance. This one is Percy Street. This is the front of Percy Street, facing west. And this is further down Percy Street, another same street, but this is at the end of the street, and they had a bungalow at the end. See other streets behind it, but see all these was in the 1936-37 slum clearance. Now, this is Thornley Infants. I got this photograph of Mr. Hodgson, or Fred, and this is his sister, Miss Hodgson. She was the teacher. When she got married, she was Mrs. Lawson, and she went to Wingate and she taught at Wingate. And I think this photograph must have been around about the 1950s. Now, this is for the benefit of those people who don't remember this, but this is Thornley Junior School, and this is just before it was pulled down. As I say, just for the people who've never seen it. Here's a nice photograph, school photograph. It's Thornley Juniors in the 1960s. Now we'll pan round this one, because with it being 1960s, a lot of people will be able to pick themselves out. Unfortunately, I only know one lad on this photograph, on the back row there, 5 in, Michael Nicholson. Now, here we've got a photograph of Thornley Drama Group. Now, we haven't got a clue what year it is. All we can tell you is when the photograph came in, we were told it was a Thornley Drama Group, and there's one lady on there, and I cannot tell you which one she is, but it's Dinah Kirk. Now, this photograph was taken in 1952. I'm not sure of the two children at the back of it, but it's one of Kirk's taxis. This is the one that Billy Kirk used to drive. It's a share line. They were beautiful motors in them days. He used to do all the taxis to all the banks and everything. They had to be well dressed with the uniform on and everything. Big organisation was Mr. Kirk's, and this was taken in 1952. This is another photograph taken in the 1936-37 slum clearance, and this is the church cottage. Now the next photograph will say the cottage from the other side, and you'll see exactly where it was sited, next to the church hall. Now this is the other view from the other side with the front door of the church cottage, and as I said, you can just see behind it, that's the church hall. Obviously the church cottage was pulled down a lot of years before the church hall, but as I say, this was taken in 1936-37. (1960s) Sports Day in Thornley. Here we've got Neville and Hazel Laverick dressed as a miner and his wife. Every sports day, all the bands used to get dressed up because it was good prize money if you won. As I said, this was in the 1960s in Neville and Hazel. Now, this is Law's Emporium. There's Mr. Law standing at the door. He used to repair bicycles. He had sold all sorts in this shop, and it was pulled down a lot of years ago. But where it was just up from the Station Hotel, just as you're coming into Thornley, opposite the Workman's Club, about 50 yards up from the Workman's Club on the other side of the road. That was where he had his shop. And I say this would have been round about, looking at the bicycles, 1920s. This is Thornley Greenwood Cottages, and this was number 32 Greenwood Cottage. And if you notice, the lady who's laying the foundation stone is Alice Lee. She is the wife of Peter Lee, and there's Peter just to the left of her, the white hair and the beard. Alice didn't do many of these, it was always Peter, but she done one or two. This was one that she did in Thornley. Now I've got this photograph of Win Coleman. She is Peter Lee's granddaughter, and I've been to see the council to see if we can get this foundation stone of number 32 Greenwood Cottages, which has her name on, and to save it and bring it up Wheatley Hill Heritage Centre, because Peter and his wife are buried in Wheatley Hill Cemetery, and it's history up here, and we would love that. But the council said I can have it when they pull this cottage down. So here's a photograph that was taken in the 1960s, the early 1960s, and it's taken off the top of number 2 Pit Pulleys. You notice straight down, you've got that little white building, that's the powder magazine, the storehouse behind it, the Quarry offices, the P offices, and over the road you've got the police station and the urinal and the clock. And if you see halfway up the photograph on the left hand side, there's a big house with a whitewashed wall. Now that closed in the 1940s, it was made into flats. It was a pub called the Edinburgh Arms along at the end of Elliott Street, and as I say, you can see the Quarry Inn just over the Quarry offices. But look at Hartlepool Street, the houses and the shops all the way down there. Could go on all night talking about the bottom of Thornley, but as I say, most of it's gone now, it's Greenbelt. As I say, this was when the Quarry was in its heyday in the 1960s. Now, this is a very early photograph. This Topshop today, it's the paper shop in Thornley. The next 2 shops was pulled down now, there's just a gap there, a Greenbelt. But at the end, that house is still standing. That used to be the Spearman's Arms for a lot of years. You'll be able to see above the door, you can see the headboard saying Spearman's Arms. It says this was a very early photograph. Now this is a page out of the Thornley Parish magazine. This was done by the church. There was all sorts in these magazines. They charge you a penny. Now these magazines go way back into the 1800s, and there was all sorts on these, what was going on at Wheatley Hill and what was going on in Thornley. But I think this one would have been after 1869, because Wheatley Hill is mentioned on it, and Wheatley Hill didn't really start up till 1869, so it's after 1869. But we have 3 reverends on there. We have the Reverend Biggs, and the Reverend Barbier, and the Reverend Greer. So if you look through the history when they were here, then you'll be able to see what year it was. All we've got on the top is it was December. Here's a lovely shot of the Dun Cow. This would have been taken the late 1800s, early 1900s. And above the door you can see the name of the landlady, Anne Park. Now also on this photograph we have Elizabeth and Margaret Park. Now that could be them 2 in the doorway. But see, this is a very old photograph, and it's the Dun Cow in Thornley. Now this is Jane Park. Now Jane, she's got this motor car here, and she was one of the first women in Thornley to own a motor car. And this is taken in Elliott Street East, and you can see right at the top of the street, that's the Dun Cow. Now the next photograph will show you Jane Park again, with the car and a little lad and a little bit more information on it. Now here's Jane again, Jane Parks with that car. You can see more of the car now. the little boy sitting on the bonnet. And this is in Albert Street again. But if you look right at the top, the right hand side, right at the back, there's a big building there. Well, that's the Wesleyan Chapel down Waterloo Street. And then you come towards you see the houses what was in Waterloo Street, and then a big building at the end, which that's the Spearman's Arms. It's still up to date. And then down into Albert Street, and this would have been taken in the 1920s. Well, here's a photograph taken in the 1950s, and it's Barry Pattison with his mum and dad and his grandparents. I don't know which street it's taken in, but as I say, it's the 1950s. Now, this is a Thornley Fair note, and it's dated November the 22nd, 1930. And I got it off George Watson, and he said I could put it on the DVD just to let you see what it was like in them days. And the money he had to draw was 9 shillings and 4pence. Now today, in our money, that is about 47.5 pence. As I say, this was 1930. We will have to apologise for this photograph because it's a newspaper cutting. And this is May 1949, when the water broke in up Shatford and there was 3 miners killed. You can see all the people standing outside and the ambulances hoping to get them out. Unfortunately, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Purvis and Mr. Rutkin, the 3 lads, they were drowned. There was a pony drowned and all. And as I say, this was a disaster in 1949. Now this is a lovely family photograph. This, I think, would have been taken around about the 1950s, and it's Mr. and Mrs. Race and the family. It looks as though there's been a birthday or maybe it's a wedding anniversary or something. But it's a wonderful photograph because there's all the Races, their sons and daughters behind. Now, here we've got Mr. Slater's shop. This was down Hartlepool Street North in Thornley in the early days, and I was given it by Wynne Coleman. She was the granddaughter of Peter Lee, but Peter's wife, these was her grandparents, and as I say, this would be early 1920s. Here's a shot in the club at Thornley, 1960s. And right at the left hand side there, that's Frankie Smith, and sitting next to George Pattison. I cannot make the other ones out, it's not the best of photographs. But as I say, it was taken in the club in the 1960s. Now here we've got Thornley Juniors football team in the 1950s. We've got a few names up here. We've got Wilkie Smith and Jimmy Armstrong, Alan Hood, Malcolm Tinkler, Davy Abbs, Davy Walker, and it was taken at Seaham. We were playing at Seaham that day, and this is Thornley Juniors in the 1950s. Sports Day in the 1960s again. Now, this is George Copeland from Shotton, and every year he used to go around all the villages for Sports Day. He used to get dressed up as the Zulu, with his spear and his shield and a ring in his nose, and 9 times out of 10 he won, but he always gave his fee back what he won. He always gave it back to some organisation, and he used to frighten everybody to death when he used to come running down the street, and this would be early 1960s. So So here's George again, a few years here till after the early 61 there, still dressed as the Zulu. His father used to do this before him for years and years and years, and when his father retired, when he got too old for it, George took over. But unfortunately George died a few years ago, but left lots of memories at the sports days. He was brilliant. As I said, this would be the middle 60s. This is another photograph of the slum clearance in 36-37, and this is the back of Albert Street West. Now here we are again looking up Albert Street East on the left and Albert Street West on the right, and you've got Walton's yard there. He used to be a builder, and he worked from there. And as I say, right at the very top on the right hand side you can see the Wesleyan Chapel, right at the back, and then just in front of it, the front street, you can see the Speyman's Arms. And this was another slum clearance photograph. Now we've got the back again of Albert Street West, and this is the back. Years and years ago it was the King's Head pub, and a lot of years ago it closed and it was made into houses, but this was the back of the old King's Head. Now this photograph, when it came in, we think it's the 1930s, and this lady here is Elsie May Stokel. Now we don't know whether she was posing for a photograph or whether it was for a beauty queen or what, but that's the best we can do with it. It's Elsie May Stokel, but we don't know what it was for, like what the occasion was. Now look at the clothes these people have on here. This was the Swinburne family in Thornley, and they had pubs and businesses and all sorts. But as I say, this is Thornley Church, and it looks like a wedding day. And as I say, this is the whole of the Swinburne family at one of the weddings. Here's a photograph of the Robin Hood Inn, which was down Albert Street, number 10 Albert Street. And this was owned by Simpson Swinburne. That's the family in the photograph before. And this photograph must have been taken in 1900s, and the Swinburne family are on the horse and cart, and as I say, taken around about 1900. Here we've got the Ritz in High Street at Thornley. You can see right down to the Quarry workshops, the streets, and you can just see the corner of the Quarry Inn. Now, the Ritz opened in 1938, and I believe it was 1944 when there was a fire and it was burnt down. But it reopened again in the 1950s, and I think this would have been taken in the 1950s. And this is the Ritz in High Street, Thornley. This is an early photograph. This is the Village Thornley. You'll see the big house at the end there where Les Buck lives. No Thornlaw North or nothing there. Now this first house on the right hand side, today that's Peter's Bakery. There's no cut there. All its houses, the Stanley Terrace hadn't even been built. Very early photograph of the village, this one. And if you notice on the left hand side, the buttress is there. That's Mr. Smith's house, that's up for sale now. As I said, this is a very early photograph. Now this is the corner at the Catholic Club. The manse, the two houses still stand today, but look at the wall around there. And look down towards the village. There's a few houses built at the far end, but it's before Stanley Terrace was built, so another very early photograph. And as I say, the Swinburnes on the two photographs before, they lived in the second one down there in the 1800s, because this was built in the 1870s, and they lived in the second house, and this is how we've gotten this photograph. Now then, look at this one, next door to the Catholic Club. This is where Les Buck's living today, and as I said, this was Swinburne's house in the 1800s, in the 1900s, and I was talking to Les the other day about it, and he says their deeds are, there's loads and loads of them for the people who had this house, but as I said, all the ivy's gone off the wall now, and the fence is gone, there's a wall there, but this is where Les lives today, next door to the Catholic Club. Now here's a photograph taken in the 1950s. It's the Thornley and District Male Voice Choir. Now this has been taken in Wheatley Hill Welfare, so they must have been doing a concert in the welfare. But as I say, it's Thornley and District, and there was Wheatley Hill people in this male voice choir as well as Thornley people. Now we're going back to the 1960s. Now this is Thornley and Wheatley Hill people on holiday, and I believe it's at Blackpool. There's quite a few bus loads here, and I've looked at them and gone through them, and I only know one person on here, and it's Mrs. Parsley from Wheatley Hill. So as I say, even if I did know all the people on here, we'd be here for an hour and a half naming them all. So I just want to say is, people might recognise themselves on here, and this was on holiday, Wheatley Hill and Thornley people in the 1960s. Now this photograph will have been taken somewhere along by the school, because these is Thornley allotments years ago, and as I say, there was loads and loads of them then, and you can see Garden Terrace in the distance. As I said, this would have been taken maybe in the 1950s. Now we've got a list here of business people and prominent people in Thornley in 1890. We'll just run down this for you to see it, and if you notice about 6 or 7 down, the Reverend Biggs. No, the Reverend, that's the one who I said earlier on was in the Church magazine, so he was around in 1890, so that Parish magazine could have been around about 1890. Here we've got Thornley Choral Society. This is Thornley Chapel, it'll be the Bow Street Chapel. And I only know a couple of names on here. Alan Lincoln's on there and Harry Watson. And as I said, this was the Choral Society in the 1950s. Another photograph in the about the 1950s again, and it's another shot of the Thornley Choral Society. But this one is taken in Wheatley Hill Welfare. Another photograph from the 1950s. This is Thornley Quarry Civil Defence. Now unfortunately I only know one name on here, and that's the man on the right is Bunty Hubbard. And he was training officer at Thornley for a while. But as I said, this was the civil defence in 1950s. Now the next 3 photographs I'm going to show you, they're all under the slum clearance again. And the 3 photographs of Elliott Street. Now this one is Elliott Street out the back. Look at the state of the roof there, tiles off, broken windows, and like I say, this one came under the 1936-37 slum clearance, and these two streets of Elliott Street were roughly behind where Sarah's shop was down at the bottom end of Thornley. Now here's another one, as I said, of Elliott Street. Looking out the back again, there's a garage at the top of the street. It's another view, and the next photograph is another one of Elliott Street, and you'll see in a second. Right, so this is the third one of Elliott Street. You see the courthouse out the back there with the little doors on where they used to throw the coals in. If you notice to the left there, looks as though somebody hasn't got any curtains up, they've got paper up at the window. But next door down has curtains. Whether it's a broken window or what, I don't know, but this was the conditions of the old Quarry houses in Thornley, one of the slum clearance. Now here we've got Thornley Drama Group. Now this would be 1940s, 1950s. I got this one of Freddie Hodgin, and his mum's on this photograph. I can't name all the people because it's too far back for me. But as I said, Freddie's wife's mum's on here, and it's 1940s, 50s. Another early football team in Thornley. All I know is Mr. Hodgins on this photograph. I don't know anybody else. As I say, it's an early football team in Thornley. Another early football team. This was taken through the First World War, and it's the season 1916-17. I wouldn't have thought they were playing football through the war, but this proves it. It's wrote on the ball there, season 1916-1917, Thornley football team. Now this is round about Nelson Street in Thornley, and it's the Thornley Fire Brigade headquarters. I believe the civil defence and the area wardens also used these buildings, but they were the fire brigade during the war. We have a photograph of the firemen with all the names on, but as I said, this was during the war, Thornley Fire Station. Thornley Hall. This is an early photograph. It would have been in the last century, like it would not be all that far back, but it's a nice shot of the hall with the trees and everything. It's a nice shot. And here we've got Swinburne Street, 1936-37. Well, this was next to Park Street, running down from Gowland's Fish Shop, which I said is the Chinese takeaway now, and this street here was opposite the pit baths, and that's the fronts of Swinburne Street facing the Thornley Quarry pit baths. Swinburne Street again, but this time we're looking down from the, as it is today, the Chinese takeaway, and we're looking down Swinburne Street, the backs, and if you see in the distance, that's the Hilly Howley, over where they used to play cricket and where the fishing pond is. Now we've got a nice photograph here of the class Thornley Infants, round about 1950. I've got quite a few names off here. There's Pamela Bowes and Peter Holden, Peter Wiggum and Derek Graham Hall. There's Danny Davis, Gordon Bradley, we have John Oswald, Tommy Jobs, Norman Bartram, just to name a few. I don't know all of them, but just to name a few. And as I say, this is Thornley Infants about 1950. Now we've got another nice school photograph here, and this is Thornley Juniors, Junior Mixed, in 1959. Again, unfortunately, it's come in, it hasn't got the names on, but I can only recognise one lad at the back there, standing above everybody else. That's Barry Jackson. But I think someone will know themselves when they say this, only going back to 59. Here we've got another photograph, Thornley football team. This is Thornley 1947-48. I don't recognise anybody on here, but it looks as though they've won the cup because they've got it at the front there with them. And as I say, I don't know anybody on here, but it's only back to 1947, so someone might know some of the lads on here and give us the names. Now here we've got another school football team, Thornley Juniors, and this one is the 1955-1956 season. I'm going to name one or two on here, but all the names is above at the top there, so you'll be able to read them, because there's W. Atty and R. Joyce, J. Sager, B. Howe, just to name a few, but as I say, all the names are on the top. So when it comes up on the DVD, you'll be able to see the names. This is the last football one. Another one with Thornley Juniors, 1956-57. You'll see, I think that's Tommy Jobs on there. Might be Ray Steele, I'm not so sure, but as I say, somebody will know the names. Nice school photograph in the Juniors at Thornley in 1963. I only know a couple of the girls on here, both on the front row. Second from the left, that's Joyce McMenamin, married Terry Unsworth. And then the fifth one along, that's Jane Orton. Jane's living down at Hetton now. But as I said, it's a nice photograph taken in 63, and all the names of everybody is on the bottom. So, you'll see, you can just read them off yourselves. (1967), another nice photograph, Thornley Juniors. As I say, I don't know anybody on here, and they haven't got the names on. So, obviously 1967. It's only going back 40 years or so everybody will know themselves on here. Now we've got the early 1960s again, Sports Day. They say the jazz band coming down the street there with a banner. Used to be quite a few jazz bands used to come and parade for the sports days. And in the background you can see the Chemist still there, and the bakery still there. And the pub, the Queen's Head, that's what it was in the 1960s, the Queen's Head. And as I see it today, everybody knows it has a new name, it's Harry's Bar. I think this one goes back to the 1940s, early 50s. It's the Tanky at Thornley. And as I say, I cannot recognise the driver and the fireman, so it's a bit before my time. But it's Thornley Tanky, late 40s, early 50s. Here's another old photograph from 36-37. Percy Street. See the little lad in the doorway there, but I can't make out what this is on the right hand side of the house. with the window out there. Seems to be a garage at the bottom. But look at the state of the road and everything. It's, as I say, they were slum clearance. Here's another one of Percy Street. Dilapidated old buildings. If you notice, right at the right hand side there, hanging on the wall, there's a car tyre, what they used to call bowlers, and they took part of the rubber off. And what they used to do with them when they used to get inside them and go down the pit heaps riding inside the tyre. It was a dangerous thing, but them days, you know, there was nothing else to do. You used to make your own enjoyment. But as I said, this is around 1936-37 again. Here's a photograph of Thornley miners getting ready to go down the pit. J.W. Harris, C. Cowell, M. MacDonald, W. Fulshire, and Mr. Peters. Haven't got the date on this, but looking at it, I think it could be around about the 1940s, early 50s. Here's a nice school photograph. And this one was taken in 1950, and it's the Catholic school. Now, I don't know a lot of paper on here, but on the front row, Donald O'Connor's sister is there, about 4 in from the right, and Mary English is on this photograph and all, and I don't know whether it's Jimmy or Bobby Paulson on the back row, 4 from the left. But it's a nice photograph, taken 1950. Thornley over 60s on Durham Station. Now, I'm not so sure of the date on this one. Looking at it, it could be the late 1950s or the early 1960s. And what it was, the over 60 was going away for a week's holiday to Bournemouth, and they all got the photographs taken on the station while waiting for the train to come. There's only one lady I know in here, and it's Mrs. Hodgin. It's Fred's mum. Here's Thornley PCC, 1955. Looks as though they'd been away on a day trip. That looks like the sea behind them where the railings are. Unfortunately, I don't know anybody on this one. As I said, it was the PCC, 1955. Now, this is June 1976, Thornley Quarry. As you say, the washer on the right hand side, and just the remnants of the number 1 shaft, the left hand side. If you notice right at the front there, they've got the mobile winder, and on the right hand side, they've got the canteen van. Now, as I said, this was June 1976 when young Frankie Lai fell down the shaft, and the man who drove the mobile winder and operated it, good friend of mine, Lenny Wilson from Washington, and he told us all about it. And he said that Frankie's granddad stayed there till the Tuesday with him until they got young Frankie out. As I said, this was 1976. Now, this is after the pit closed. The washer was still working. Notice all the colliery houses all pulled down, all finished, and notice how it's very overgrown down both sides of the railway there. But they still use the railway to take the coal away from the washer, because there was a few coast collieries was sending the coal to get washed at Thornley because they couldn't handle it at their collieries, and this is why it was still open for about 5 or 6 years after the pit closed. Now we've got Class 6 Thornley School, 1900. And Freddie Hodgin gave us this photograph. His dad's on there, Bertie. I cannot pick him out, but he's on this photograph, and as I say, it was taken in 1900. March 1979. Terrible winter that year. You couldn't move at all. 12-foot drifts plus. And this photograph was taken from Wheatley in Thornley along, and that's the junior school. You can see yourselves how deep it was there. As I said, this was the bad winter of 1979. Thornley Wesleyan's football team, 1921-22. I only know that Mr. Hodgins on this photograph. Can't pick the other ones out. But as I said, it was 1921-22. This will be early 1960s, I would have thought. It's the Methodist Thornley Youth of Stepford. And we got this photograph of David Iverson, that's him at the front, second from the right. And when he brought it in, he said, here's a photograph of Thornley. And he says, now I'm there, second on the right. And that's all, the only name he gave us. But you'll be able to see yourselves on this one. Looks as though they've won the cup, because they've got the big one at the front there, and quite a few behind got the small cups. And as I said, this would have been approximately early 1960s. Well, this photograph came into Heritage Centre, but there's no names on it. All it's got is Thornley lads, unknown. But obviously this would be taken in the late 50s, early 60s, so somebody will know these lads on here, and we would like names if anybody can give us them. So as I say, that's what was on it, unknown, but being saved. Now, this is the Wesleyan Chapel in Thornley. There's no date on it. Now I'm positive I got this photograph of Gloria Dower, and I think that's her daughter at the front with the white dress on and the star. And I think this has been a nativity player in the Wesleyan Chapel, but as I say, I haven't got a date on it. Now, going to the 1960s here, it's Thornley Welfare, and this is all the ladies that waited on at weddings. There's been a wedding in the community centre. Well, as I say, welfare at the time. And that lady, third from the left, is Mrs. Quinn. That's Maureen Quinn's mum. And these ladies will have been the waiters on at the wedding. Back to the 1960s again. I think quite a few people will recognise these two. Jeff Lloyd on his scooter and Peter Wiggum sitting on the back. I don't know where this one's taken, but as I say, it's Jeff Lloyd and Peter Wiggum in the 1960s. It's 1930. It's Thornley Band and Banner going to Dunby meeting. As you notice on the left hand side there, that's Oswald's shop. It's the only photograph we've got of Oswald's shop. But that used to be the Black Horse pub years and years ago. And then when it packed in as a pub, Oswald's took it over. And as I say, this is the only photograph of Oswald's shop that we've got. So, this is a receipt. Now, I didn't know that this is Hartlepool Street, Thornley, J. Barker, and it's the Chemist. Now, I'm thinking when Elliott's sold their shop, it looks as though Barker's has bought it for a Chemist, and then it's gone on to Whitfield's. But this was taken in 1946, and it says to WD he's been getting something from the chemist, and see signed over the stamp. But I've just put it on to, you know, let people say there was a chemist in Thornley called Barker's, but I think that's the only explanation I've got. It must have been before Whitfields got it. Another old receipt, Hanley's Butchers. Now Hanley's Butchers was next to the Three Horse Shoes in Hartlepool Street, and when Hanley sold it, Mr Wilson bought it, and Mr Wilson had it until it closed. It's still standing today. At the top of Bow Street there's a big 4-bedroom white house. Now that was Hanley's Butchers, and then it was Wilson's. You see the receipt there, it's the 1940s, and they paid 1 and 3pence for something, and 1 and 7pence, 5 and a penny, 2 and a penny. That's the old money, whereas I say this was in Thornley, Hartlepool Street. I haven't got a date for this one. It was Thornley Catholic Church. It's an early one, because it's not like that today. And as I say, I got this off George Nairn. It's a lovely photograph of Thornley Church, Catholic Church. And as I say, it's an early one, but I haven't got a date for it. Here's the Barrel and Grapes Inn, Thornley. And when Irene Robinson had it, this would have been taken, well, she was in the 1960s, so it would be taken before then. And then it changed to the Halfway House, and then to Crossways. I'm just showing you this one, like it had 3 names: the Barrel and Grapes, Halfway House, and then Crossways. Well, this will never be seen again. Luckily someone took a photograph before it was pulled down. As I said, in the early days it was the Barrel and Grapes, then Halfway House, and then the Crossways. And as you say, this photograph will never be seen, it'll never be seen again, this pub, and this photograph saved it, like. But this was pulled down last year, 2008, and years to come, people will be able to see it.